Hello everyone and welcome back to English with Kayleigh. In today's video we're going to analyse another of Ted Hughes' poems. This one is entitled Telegraph Wires. So let's get into it. So first of all, we'll just read through the poem. As we always do, we'll consider a brief summary, we'll think about the themes, and then we'll do our stanza by stanza analysis. So this is actually one of the shorter poems in the collection that's tested for Cambridge, consisting of just 6 short stanzas in couplet format. So let's read through the poem together. So take telegraph wires a lonely moor and fit them together. The thing comes alive in your ear. Towns whisper to towns over the heather, but the wires cannot hide from the weather. So oddly, so daintily made, it is picked up and played. Such unearthly airs the ear hears and withers. In the revolving ballroom of space, bowed over the moon, a bright face draws out of telegraph wires the tones that empty human bones. So whilst it's quite a short poem, it's definitely packed with an intense message. So let's just read through a summary. Let's make sure we understand the poem. So we see at the very beginning the implementation of telegraph wires in this kind of uncultivated moorland. So somewhere that is usually very peaceful and undisturbed. And now obviously we have these huge posts with wires that are able to connect people and towns. So the poet describes how these wires allow for communities and towns to communicate. And then I really should say the speaker actually. So the speaker talks of the fragility of the wires and how it's seen to be played like a musical instrument. And then the speaker finishes by highlighting the devastating messages the wires send out, the messages that it's passed on to others. Very interestingly, this poem was written in the 1980s, but of course when we consider it in today's world, in the modern world, and how technology influences us, it's an incredible poem. So I think that the main theme that Telegraph Wires considers and looks at is our relationship with technology, and the pros and the cons of it. So let's take a look then at stanza 1 and stanza 2. So it starts with take telegraph wires. So the persona, the speaker, speaks directly to the reader, and forces us to consider technology. And given the year that this was published and the time in which it was written, this was possibly alluding to the telephone, because they often repurposed technological devices and things for, as we move towards a more modern world. So it's possible that he was talking about the telephone. So take the telegraph wires a lonely moor. So we already have this juxtaposition here of technology and nature, so man-made and natural, and then we see this undisturbed nature, a very quiet place. When we contrast that with what technology creates, it creates a hubbub and a way of communicating with each other, and we fit them together. So we see that technology and nature are coming together to extend communication. And the stanza finishes with, the thing comes alive in your ear. I can't help but think about Frankenstein when I read that particular sentence. Literally, it's because of the noises that are produced through the phone and across the wires, especially, in the 80s and 90s with the dial-up connection. You'd often hear that crackling sound. But the metaphorical meaning is obviously that sharing and understanding of messages that are transmitted across the wires. Also subtly implies that we cannot control technology, in thinking about that they do take on a life of their own and that they do make their own decisions as we become more advanced. So there's a hint there, that whilst it is man-made and it's been created, how much can we actually control it? There are a number of caesaras used throughout, and this caesura here, and fit them together, it does create that dramatic pause in thinking, okay, in fitting them together, what have we created? What is it that is the result? The second stanza starts with towns, whisper to towns, and town is a mentonym for the people who can connect. So it's not just about one particular town to another. It's the idea that people from all over can now connect with one another, meaning that technology has overcome these restrictions that nature impose on us. What's interesting, though, is the verb that is used is to whisper. They whisper to towns, which gives us this sense of a weakness. So maybe that's that's Hughes's or the speaker's feelings towards the technology. But we also get this kind of ghostly sense that it's something that is quite unnatural. And the stanza finishes, but the wires cannot hide from the weather. So, of course, thinking about the fragility of technology, in that it cannot escape nature and Mother Nature. So we move on to stanza 3 and stanza 4. These stanzas here, they really focus on the strangeness of the telegraph wires and what they facilitate. So just continuing with that theme, and this idea that it's something that is unnatural. So the third stanza, so oddly, so daintily made, it is picked up and played. This can have a number of meanings. We could pick it apart and look at it in lots of different ways. So this could be, the wires themselves, that are creating those sounds. But it could also be the people, if we consider the telephone dialing numbers, almost like a musical melody as they dial. But it could also be about the weather and how they can toy with the wires, especially if we consider the last stanza. So there is a sense of musicality to this particular stanza, which is obviously reflected in what is said, the content, but also in the techniques that are used. So we've got that mimicked with the alliteration of the P sound, the consonants of the D, which again just mimics and highlights that dainty sense and the oddness of the device. And that it should be handled with care. And again, does that then link to Hughes's thoughts on technology, in that it is fragile, but we also need to be concerned, and we need to have we need to handle it, and we need to think about it carefully before we allow it to consume so much of our time and our life, which is very interesting when you consider the poem in the context of the modern day. This anaphora of so, it does create this kind of discomfort in the reading, and again suggests that something is not quite right. So just going back to that idea that it's unnatural. So the next stanza, such unearthly airs. So again, we get this sense of this oddness, and now it becomes a little bit more explicit with unearthly, these alien sounds, so are going against the natural world in which it is situated. The ear hears. So of course this is a synodoche. This is to represent the people who receive the messages. And again, we get the sense it's quite unnatural for us as humans to be reduced to one sense, because we have, these 5 senses that we use to make sense of the world. So being reduced to one, again, is quite unnatural and something that creates a sense of discomfort. And then as we move on to the ear hears and withers, this is obviously what a person does when they receive bad news. We almost shrink. So there's a great deal of sense of what the telegraph wires can facilitate in terms of the negative impact it can have on human lives. So then we move on to stanza 5 and stanza 6, so the last 2 stanzas of the poem, and this is where the poem turns back to nature. In the revolving ballroom of space, bowed over the more a bright face, So of course, Hughes alluding to the night sky, and that ballroom creates the imagery of a sky full of stars at night, and it almost looks like a dome above us. So we see a bright face draws out. So here we see this personification of the moon, and it tells us that nature oversees all that transpires below it. And that's when we start to get this almost threatening sense that nature prevails. And that is continued in the last sentence, the last line of the poem, that empty human bones. So like the bad news that travels, and of course this is likely about the death of loved ones, the bones that remain. And this just tells us that the reality is that no matter what technology is created, humans cannot evade the sharing of bad news that comes from suffering and death, because those are things that we cannot change no matter the technology that we have. And of course, this is all emphasized by the enjambment used in the final two stanzas. There are forces at work that are well beyond our control. So let's talk briefly about the form, the meter, and the rhyme. So the form, we have 6 stanzas composed of rhyming couplets. And that really aims to create a sense of control, humanity's desire to control its environment, and the man-made elements that we've created. However, when we look at the enjambment of the stanzas, we can see that actually that is beyond our control. It slips away from us. So there's that attempt to have control. However, within the context of the poem and the content of the poem, we see that's not actually possible. The meter, it doesn't have a regular meter. On the one hand, the poem seems very controlled with the rhyming couplets, as we said. However, within the couplets, the rhyme is quite unpredictable. And that goes to create a sense of tension between humans and nature, technology, and the natural world. And finally, the rhyme, as we said, a very strict rhyme scheme. And that obviously just creates that control that is desired by people. However, Hughes obviously tells us that it's something that is beyond our control. So finally, I thought I'd leave you with an essay question, a practice question, so you can write a full essay on this, or you can share some bullet points down below. I think that's the best way for you guys to interact and help each other. So the essay question I have is, what is Hughes's message about human relationships with technology? So leave your comments down below, and I'll be sure to respond. Please don't forget to like and subscribe for more Ted Hughes poetry and English literature in general. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.